Imagine more than 1,000 soldiers exhausted from war, packed into an old train traveling home hoping for a short break of peace. But as the train moves through the steep, winding paths of the French Alps, something goes terribly wrong. The brakes fail. The train speeds up, racing out of control toward disaster. Wooden carriages break apart, and in the blink of an eye, fire spreads everywhere. This is the story of one of the deadliest train crashes in history of France, a tragedy lost in the chaos of World War I. What really happened on that cold December night in 1917? And why was this disaster kept hidden for so long? Stay with us as we uncover the haunting tale of the Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne train disaster that shook France and left behind unanswered questions. Before we dive into the background of this tragic train disaster, I invite you to subscribe this channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our train disaster documentaries. Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne is a small town in southeastern France. As of 2019, it had a population of 2,467 people. In 1962, the population was 3,958. The town is located 114 kilometers south of Geneva, Switzerland, and 60.5 kilometers east of Grenoble. Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne lies on the Maurienne line, also known as the Culloz-Moudon Railway. This 135-kilometer double-track, electrified railway was built in sections from 1856 to 1871, with trains reaching Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne by 1862. It connects the Lyon-Geneva line to the Italian border at Modane, making it a key route for passenger and freight trains between France and Italy. Trains on this line now reach speeds of up to 150 kilometers per hour. The section between Modane and Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne is steep, with slopes as steep as 3% and sharp curves as tight as 350 meters in radius. The M612 was a military train carrying French soldiers home for Christmas, most of them coming from the Italian front. This holiday leave was meant to boost morale after the widespread mutinies in the French army during the summer of 1917. The train started in Vicenza, Italy, and was heading to Chambéry, France. By the time it left Modane station, it had a baggage car, 15 four-axle passenger cars, another baggage car, and two two-axle passenger cars. All the cars were made with wooden bodies on steel frames. Official records show 982 passengers, along with 7 brakemen. Only the first 3 cars had pneumatic brakes, while the rest had hand brakes or no brakes at all. The brakemen had to manually operate the brakes based on whistle signals from the locomotive. Running with limited brakes was standard for freight trains, and M612 was classified as 1. Some of the passenger cars had no working electric lights, so soldiers were given candles. Some reports suggest that all cars had brakes, but not enough brakemen were available to operate them properly. The train was formed by combining 2 trains from Italy, but only 1 locomotive was available for the rest of the journey due to wartime shortages. The second locomotive was needed for an eastbound ammunition transport. This left the entire load to a single locomotive, PLM, Type 230, number 2592. The Type 230 was a 5-axle steam locomotive introduced in 1910 for passenger trains. It was 40 feet long and weighed 73.4 metric tons when ready for service. It had 2 leading axles, 3 drive axles, and pulled a 3-axle tender. Despite its size, it could reach speeds of up to 110 kilometers per hour. After the train was assembled at Modane station, it had to wait on a sidetrack to let more important trains pass, like the Modane-Paris Express. Many officers left the M612 and continued their journey on the express train. The driver of the M612 noticed that the other train's locomotive was being sent back east. He refused to get back on his own train, saying it was too heavy for the limited brakes, especially with the steep downhill path ahead. However, the transport officer in charge ordered the driver to return to the locomotive or face a military trial for refusing orders. With no choice, the driver got back on board, and at 11:15 p.m. on December 12, 1917, the overloaded train left Modane station, heading toward a disaster that seemed impossible to avoid. The driver tried his best to use the brakes carefully, making sure they didn't overheat. He managed to keep the train under control on the first downhill section, arriving in the town of Fresnay at a slow speed of 10 kilometers per hour. But after leaving Fresnay, the slope became steeper, and the train started speeding out of control. It reached a dangerous speed of 135 kilometers per hour as it raced down into the valley. Even though the driver tried everything to slow it down, the train kept rushing forward toward Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne, heading toward disaster. As the train entered a left-hand turn carved into the mountainside, the front baggage car derailed, going 102 kilometers per hour in an area with a speed limit of only 40 kilometers per hour. The car tipped over, turned sideways, and broke away from the rest of the train, just 1.3 kilometers from the Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne station. One after another, the following cars crashed into the overturned baggage car, shattering into pieces. The wooden carriages were destroyed so badly that they were beyond recognition. The wreckage quickly caught fire, fueled by the overheated brakes and the candles the soldiers used for light. Some soldiers had also smuggled grenades and ammunition aboard, causing explosions and bursts of gunfire, making the situation even worse. The train was covered in flames before it could even come to a complete stop, turning the crash into an unimaginable tragedy. The train driver finally stopped the locomotive at the Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne station, only to realize that the entire train, except for the tender, was gone. He was injured, but what lay behind him was far worse. At least 700 soldiers lost their lives in the crash and the fire that followed, though some reports say the number was 675. The exact number of deaths is unknown, because many bodies were burned beyond recognition, and the military tried to downplay the disaster. Official reports at the time mentioned 425 people had died, but it's believed that many soldiers had boarded the train without permission, possibly making the real number could be even higher. Most of the wreckage got stuck between a rock wall and a retaining wall, trapping the fire and making it burn even hotter, like an oven. The train driver, unaware of how severe the disaster was, found two groups of British soldiers at the station and went back along the tracks hoping to rescue survivors. But when he reached the crash site, he saw the full scale of the tragedy for the first time. The British soldiers were at the station because the manager at La Praz saw the runaway train speeding by and quickly warned the station master at Saint-Jean-de-Maurienne. Thanks to this quick action, an eastbound British train was stopped before it could leave, preventing a deadly head-on collision that would have made things even worse. Out of the 16 train cars, 14 were completely destroyed in the crash. Only the last two cars stopped almost undamaged. The huge pile of wreckage blocked access from the valley side, leaving only a narrow path for survivors and rescuers to enter or leave. Survivors were taken to a local hospital, and a nearby pasta factory was quickly turned into a temporary hospital and morgue. As firefighters searched through the wreckage, they found about 600 bodies. Another 37 soldiers were discovered along the tracks uphill, most likely thrown from the train or having jumped to try to escape during the derailment. By the next morning, only 183 men from the train reported to their commanders. Sadly, over 100 of the survivors died in hospitals or on their way to get medical help over the next 2 weeks. This added to the confusion about the exact number of deaths, which is estimated to be between 675 and 800. The fire that burned through the wreckage wasn't put out until the evening after the accident, leaving almost nothing of the train cars or the victims. More than 100 victims were never identified and were buried together in a communal grave near the local cemetery. The accident was immediately labeled as a military secret and kept hidden for 90 years. The French press was told not to report on it, and only a short 21-line article appeared in Le Figaro 4 days after the disaster. 6 railway employees, including the surviving train driver, were put on trial, but all of them were found not guilty. 6 years later, the French Minister of Defense inaugurated a memorial at the Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne cemetery to honor the victims. In 1961, the victims' remains were moved to the National Military Cemetery in Lyon. Finally, in 1998, a monument was placed near the crash site. However, the monument lists only 425 victims. The Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne disaster is considered one of the worst railway accidents in history by death toll, surpassed only by a derailment in Sri Lanka during the 2004 tsunami, which killed at least 900 people. The negligence that led to the 1917 derailment would not happen today. Military trains are now treated like regular passenger trains and are carefully monitored. Modern trains also no longer rely on manual brakes. Pneumatic braking systems run through all the cars, eliminating the need for brakemen. Additionally, wooden-bodied train cars are no longer in use, except on historic tours, making trains much safer. The tragedy at Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne serves as a haunting reminder of the dangers of negligence during times of war. Hundreds of soldiers who survived the front lines never made it home, not because of battle, but due to poor decisions and outdated technology. Today, modern safety standards make such a disaster almost impossible, but the story of this forgotten tragedy still raises important questions. Could this have been avoided if more precautions were taken? Were the lives of these soldiers sacrificed in the name of convenience during wartime? And why did it take nearly a century for this story to be acknowledged publicly? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think this disaster could have been prevented?